The call came at 2:14 on a Thursday morning. I rolled over and looked at my phone expecting a work alert. I inspect industrial sites for an energy company and emergencies don't keep business hours. Then I saw the name on the screen. Not my supervisor, not my buddy Craig, my niece's name, Chloe. 5 years old. I picked up on the second ring. There was breathing. Then a voice, small and completely steady. The way children describe terrifying things like they're reading off a grocery list. Uncle Marcus, I'm hungry. I can't find Mommy. I was dressed and out the door before she finished the sentence. I live 40 minutes from my sister Renee's apartment in Cordova. I did it in 26. The living room lamp was the only light on in the building, front door unlocked, and Chloe was sitting on the kitchen counter, holding Renee's phone with both hands, feet dangling, wearing a pajama top and exactly one sock. She looked up when I came in and said, matter-of-factly, I used the emergency numbers on the refrigerator. She wasn't crying. She'd already passed through whatever crying she needed to do. I lifted her down and checked her the way my 6 years as a Navy corpsman trained me, to check people in distress. Colour, responsiveness, pupils, skin hydration. She was dehydrated and underfed but stable. There was half a bag of crackers on the coffee table. 3 juice boxes on the floor, 2 empty. 1 punctured at a crooked angle where she'd worked the straw in herself. She had been surviving on crackers and juice boxes. I asked her how long she'd been alone. She thought about it. 2 sleeps, 2 nights. My 5-year-old niece had been alone in an apartment for 2 full nights. On crackers and juice, the refrigerator, leftover rice, a bottle of ketchup, a box of baking soda. The garbage hadn't been emptied in at least a week. Chloe's bedroom was the only organised space in the apartment. Her stuffed animals lined up along the headboard with a precision that told me she'd arranged them herself repeatedly as a way of controlling the one small territory she had. I called my parents. No answer. My mother's cell. Straight to voicemail. I called 911 and reported an abandoned child. While we waited, I sat on the floor next to Chloe and let her pick what we watched on my phone. She chose a cartoon about a dog who solves mysteries. We were 20 minutes in when I noticed she had her hand wrapped around my thumb, not squeezing, just holding on. The way you'd hold something you weren't sure you were allowed to keep. If you've ever been the steady one in a family that was quietly coming apart, the one who noticed things before anyone else was willing to name them, this story is going to feel familiar. Stay with me. The CPS caseworker who arrived was named Patricia, efficient direct. She asked if I could take emergency placement. I said yes before she finished the question. After she left, I carried Chloe to my apartment on the other side of town, made her scrambled eggs and toast, watched her eat with the focused intensity of a child who'd been rationing for 2 days. She was halfway through before she slowed down enough to talk. I asked carefully, "Where did your mom go?" Chloe shrugged. "The place with the lights." She said it the way kids say things they've been told not to repeat, but don't fully understand as secrets. The place with the lights. I sat with that for a long time after she fell asleep. Here's the part that took me weeks to fully piece together, and I'll tell you now. Every single piece was worse than the one before it. My name is Marcus Ellis, 35 years old, 6 years Navy, 2 deployments as a corpsman. When I came back to Memphis, I went into safety inspection for an energy company. Detail work. The kind of job where missing something small has real consequences. My sister Renee is 8 years younger than me. She grew up in South Memphis. Our father drove delivery trucks until his knees gave out. Our mother worked dispatch at a medical supply company. Good, steady people. The kind of parents who went without so their kids didn't have to. Renee was the one teachers loved. She graduated college with a 3.4 and a job offer before she'd walked the stage. At 23, she married a man named Troy. For a while, things looked right. Then Troy cheated. Renee found out, and the marriage lasted 14 months. She walked away with an apartment, a 2-year-old daughter, and a grief she didn't know how to carry. She started going to the casino on Riverside Drive, once a week, with a friend from work, just to decompress, just to feel like she was winning something. I know exactly how it starts. I watched it start. I just didn't understand the speed. The first sign I dismissed, Chloe's 3rd birthday party. I drove over with a gift and found Renee distracted. Sunglasses inside, laughing too fast at things that weren't funny. The birthday cake was from a gas station. I mentioned it to my mother afterward. She waved her hand like she was dispersing smoke. Renee's going through a hard time. The divorce hit her harder than she lets on. I gave Renee space. That was my first mistake. I kept making it for 3 years. The first time I found out about money was when my father let it slip during a Sunday phone call. Renee had needed a loan. How much? His voice went quiet the way voices go when the number is bigger than the word loan covers. $4,000. Back rent, he said. She'd had some expenses. I drove to their house in Whitehaven the following Sunday and sat down at the kitchen table. Did you ask specifically what the money was for? My father looked at my mother. My mother looked at her hands. She needed it, my mother said. She's my daughter. I'm not going to interrogate her like she's on trial. I said I wasn't asking her to interrogate anyone. I was asking her to ask. We can't push her away, Marcus. She's already fragile. That word. I heard it probably 30 times over the next 4 years. Always applied to Renee like it was a medical exemption from every normal expectation. By the time Chloe was 4, the number had quietly climbed to $22,000. Not one loan, a series of them, each small enough to feel survivable, each justified by a crisis that always seemed to arrive just before rent was due or utilities were shutting off. My mother handled most of the transfers without telling my father, some from their joint savings. Some from a Visa card she'd opened without mentioning it to anyone. My father knew about part of it. He told me later he'd learned not to look at certain statements, that what you don't see in the paperwork is still there in the balance, but at least you get to sleep. I tried once at a Christmas dinner table to name what I was seeing. I used the word pattern deliberately, because it's harder to dismiss than crisis. My mother set down her fork. The expression on her face was one I'd seen 100 times growing up, the one that means, this is the moment I decide whether you're still welcome at this table. Your sister needs support, Marcus, not surveillance. Renee wasn't at dinner. She'd called ahead to say she wasn't feeling well. I found out later she'd been at the casino until 4 a.m. and had driven home on no sleep. After that Christmas, the calls between me and my parents got shorter. Topics stayed on the surface. Weather, work, something funny Chloe had said. Never Renee. I accepted the surface because the alternative was silence, and silence from your own mother is its own kind of cold. 6 months before Chloe called me at 2 a.m., a neighbour of Renee's named Doretha reached out. Older woman, kept her own counsel. Only ever spoke to me when she'd run out of other options. There's a man who comes around, drives a grey Cadillac, parks in front of her building and just sits, sometimes an hour. I asked what he looked like. Pressed shirt, money watch. Smiles when he's not happy. I know that kind of smile from having been married to one. I drove to Renee's apartment, knocked. She answered with the specific calm of someone who'd seen me coming and had already prepared herself. I asked about the man with the grey Cadillac. Her jaw tightened. That's just a friend. He helped me with something. What kind of something? I'm 30 years old. I'm not explaining my friends to my brother. I looked past her at Chloe, sitting on the floor colouring with markers. She looked up and waved. Renee's eyes followed mine. Don't, she said. Quiet but fierce. Don't make her part of whatever point you're trying to make. I held up my hands. I just want to know you're okay. Something moved across her face. Not anger. Something closer to exhaustion and shame. And it was gone before I could hold on to it. I'm fine, she said, and closed the door. There's a moment in every family like this one where the lie gets so practiced that both sides stop noticing it's a lie. If you know that moment, if you've sat at that table, heard that door close, told yourself it was probably nothing, stay with me, because this is where it stops being probably nothing. 2 weeks after Chloe's call, I found out who the man with the grey Cadillac was. His name was Victor Pruitt. He ran a financial consulting company called Vantage Solutions out of a strip mall near the county line. The office looked entirely legitimate. Business cards, a receptionist, a printer running forms constantly. The kind of place that looked, from the outside, like a problem you'd never have. Behind the desk, Victor ran an emergency lending operation for people the banks had already said no to. He charged 40% annual interest on short-term loans, used post-dated checks as collateral, and called it financial counselling. When payments stopped, Victor didn't threaten. He arrived. He sat in his grey Cadillac in front of people's homes or offices and waited. He sent formal letters on business stationery that walked the legal line between notification and menace so precisely that they were almost art. I learned all of this from a man I'd served with named Craig Fowler, who had spent the 4 years since discharge working for a private investigations firm in Nashville. He stays just technical enough that nothing individual is easy to prove, Craig told me. But his borrowers are always people at their lowest. He knows it, he counts on it. How much is Renee into him for? Craig was quiet for a beat. At least 24,000, possibly more. He runs a second account off the main books. Another pause. There's one more thing. He's had 2 phone conversations recently with your parents. I found it in his call log. I went still. My parents knew about Victor Pruitt. That sent me to my parents' house on a Tuesday morning, when I knew my mother would be at her standing hair appointment. My father was in the backyard, pulling at weeds that didn't need pulling. He does that when things get too heavy inside. I've known that about him my whole life. I sat down across from him at the porch table. I have 2 coffees. I told him I knew about Victor Pruitt and the phone calls. I told him to tell me the part I didn't know. He put down his mug. Your mother asked me not to say anything. I know. Tell me anyway. He rubbed his hands together, the way they do when they ache, even in June. Then he told me. 3 months earlier, Renee had come to the house in tears. She needed $12,000. Victor had threatened to notify her employer's HR department about her outstanding debt, which would flag her for a background review, which could cost her her job. She had Chloe with her. She sat at this porch table and cried for 45 minutes. My mother had pulled $12,000 from their retirement account, told my father it was an emergency dental procedure. I asked when he found out the truth. Victor had shown up at the house himself, 2 weeks after the payment, rang the doorbell, shook my father's hand, told him the $12,000 hadn't covered the remaining balance. There was still 11 more owed. My father stared at the fence. They'd worked out a payment arrangement. My mother's car was collateral. My mother's car, collateral on a debt she'd already partially paid to cover a loan her daughter had taken from a man charging 40% interest. I asked how much in total my parents had put in over 4 years. He named a number, $61,000, add Victor's remaining balance. $83,000 total. I had to write it in my notebook to make myself believe it. I looked at my father, a man who had driven trucks across 5 states, fixed every mechanical thing in every house we'd ever lived in, raised 2 children, and never once made a decision that hurt someone who didn't deserve it. Sitting at a porch table in June, staring at a fence he'd built himself, undone. How long have you known Renee was missing? I asked quietly. He didn't answer, which was its own answer. She'd told them she was going to the grocery store. 4 days ago, he knew. He knew his daughter was gone, and his granddaughter had been alone for 2 nights, and he had not called me. He didn't call, because calling me meant saying out loud what he already knew, that this wasn't a hard time anymore, that this was a system, and the system had just left a 5-year-old on crackers. I spent the next 48 hours building a case the way I'd been trained to build a safety violation report, methodically sourced, nothing assumed. Craig pulled Victor's full operation, 12 active borrowers in the Memphis area, 3 of them over 65, 6 with prior contact with crisis services, every single one a gambling addict or a direct family member of one. 4 had signed informal collateral agreements that had no standing under Tennessee law, but which Victor apparently enforced through the slow, steady pressure of just showing up. No single page was a crime. The system was. I called the Tennessee Department of Financial Institutions. Then I got a name, Detective Sandra Reeves, Financial Crimes Unit, Shelby County. But none of that mattered until I found Renee. A neighbor from her complex called me the following morning. She'd seen Renee's car at a casino 2 exits east on 240. Still there. I walked into that casino in the middle of a Tuesday afternoon and found my sister at a slot machine bank near the rear of the floor. She was wearing clothes that looked like they were from 2 days ago. She didn't see me until I was right beside her. She looked up. Pure terror, not of me, of the specific dread of being found by the person who already knows everything. Then the wall went up. I don't need a lecture, Marcus. Chloe has been alone for 2 days, Renee. She looked away at the machine. I was coming back. I need you to stand up and come outside with me. She didn't move. I lowered my voice to the frequency I learned in deployment. Not a command. Something quieter and more serious than that. The pitch of a voice that says, "This is not a negotiation." She stood. In the parking lot. Away from the noise I saw what the casino light had hidden. The hollowing around her eyes. The way her hands moved without purpose. Reaching for things that weren't there. The same involuntary tremor I'd seen in people coming off 48 hours of combat adrenaline. A nervous system calibrated to a kind of stimulation it could no longer function without. "This isn't you choosing to gamble anymore," I said. This is something that has taken over, and we're past the point where anyone can cover it. She was quiet. I told her about the CPS report, the emergency placement, what Chloe had said when I got there. About the crackers. She broke on the crackers, not dramatically. She pressed both hands flat against the trunk of her car and breathed like someone trying not to go under. Then very quietly, "I didn't know I was that person." "You're not that person yet," I said. "That's why I'm here right now." Getting Renee to sign the intake paperwork for an inpatient assessment took a long conversation that my mother was present for. What made the difference, more than anything I said, was my mother looking at her daughter and saying, "I have been protecting you the wrong way for 4 years. I need to help you differently now." I don't know what it costs a mother to say that out loud. I watched it happen and I still don't fully understand it. But I know what came before it. The night after I found Renee, I drove to my parents' house. My mother was sitting at the kitchen table when I came in. No pretense. She already knew from my father's call what I'd been doing for 2 weeks. I sat down. I didn't speak first. You learn that. Sometimes the most important thing you can do is let the silence work. She spoke first. My mother left when I was 11. She was looking at the wall, not at me. My father drank every night. She tried for years. Then one morning she packed a bag and took a bus to Portland, and I never heard from her again. I was standing in the kitchen watching the door close. She smoothed her skirt. "I made a promise," I said. "I will never be that woman. I will never give up on my child. No matter how bad it gets, I will love them enough to stay." She finally looked at me. Her eyes were dry. She'd cried herself out before I arrived. "I thought my mother didn't love enough. That's why my father kept drinking. I thought love was the thing that fixed people." I looked at her. This woman who had sold her retirement, lied to her husband, watched her granddaughter go unfed. All of it in the name of a promise she'd made to an 11-year-old version of herself, standing in a kitchen watching a door close. "You weren't her," I said quietly. "You were the opposite of her." And it still broke. She pressed her lips together, a long breath. "I know." I put my hand on hers. "I'm not asking you to stop loving Renee. I'm asking you to love Chloe more than you're afraid of losing Renee." She nodded. I didn't know if she meant it. I knew she'd try. I knew she'd sometimes fail. That's the deal when the people you love are broken in places you can't reach. Victor Pruitt's case built steadily over 2 months. Detective Reeves got 4 of his 12 borrowers to come forward once she reached out. Personally. His informal lending operation was found to violate multiple Tennessee statutes on unlicensed financial services and predatory lending. The collateral arrangements, including the one involving my mother's car, were declared unenforceable. Victor was charged with unlicensed lending, consumer fraud, and 2 counts of aggravated coercion. He took a plea arrangement, restitution to victims, a 2-year suspended sentence, loss of his business license. Vantage Solutions was shuttered. The grey Cadillac sat in the lot for 2 weeks before someone towed it. My parents' financial damage didn't disappear because the man who helped cause it got a conviction. But they connected with a housing counsellor who restructured their debt into something survivable. My mother started attending a support group for family members of problem gamblers. She still goes on Wednesday evenings. She told me once that the hardest moment she'd had there was listening to a woman describe, almost word for word, identical in every detail, exactly what she herself had been doing for Renee, and realizing for the first time that it had a name. Renee completed inpatient treatment. She came back different in the way people come back from things that required them to be honest about who they'd become. We're not who we were when she was 20. We're building something slower and more deliberate. She has supervised visits with Chloe twice a week. Last Tuesday, Chloe brought home a drawing from school. Her teacher had asked everyone to draw their family. Chloe drew 5 people. Me, my parents, Renee, and herself, all standing in a row with their arms touching at the elbow. Everyone had a smile. Renee was standing in the doorway when Chloe held it up. "Is that okay, Mama?" Renee put a hand over her mouth. "That's perfect, baby." Chloe has been with me for 5 months. I moved us to a 2-bedroom in Midtown with a backyard that's mostly concrete but has 1 tree that loses its leaves in October, which she considers a personal gift from the tree to her specifically. She started 1st grade last month. Her teacher told me at the first conference that Chloe was one of those kids who watches everything. Quiet at first, but once she decided the room was safe, she started raising her hand. Once she decided the room was safe. I drove home that night, and she was at the kitchen table doing addition facts, using her fingers for the 7s. I made dinner while she worked. She told me about something funny that happened at recess, using 3 different voices to act it out. I laughed in the right places. She ate 2 full plates. She asked for juice. She said thank you before I handed it to her. After dinner I washed, and she dried. We had a system. She couldn't reach the upper cabinets. So I handled those, she handled the lower ones. At some point she started humming something from school. I stood at the sink and listened to her hum and thought about a 5-year-old girl deciding which number on the refrigerator to call, the specific courage that requires, the specific trust. She put the last bowl away and turned to me. Uncle Marcus. Yeah, is this our house? For as long as you need it, I said. And maybe longer. She considered this with the seriousness she brings to most things. Then she nodded, once, and went back to her homework. There's something you learn in emergency work. The difference between a situation that's stable and one that's controlled. Stable means it isn't actively getting worse. Controlled means someone made a decision about where the line goes and is holding it. My family was stable for 4 years. Nobody was making anything better, but the bleeding was slow enough that everyone could pretend it wasn't there. What changed wasn't the emergency. The emergency had been building for 4 years, dollar by dollar, lie by lie, chance after chance after chance. What changed was when someone decided that stable wasn't enough, that the situation needed a line. Needed someone willing to draw it and hold it, even when the people they loved most were on the other side asking them to let go. That's not cruelty. That's love with a spine. If someone in your life right now has turned their crisis into your permanent address, if the word loyalty has been used to keep you quiet, if you've been called selfish for wanting accountability, hear this. You can love someone and refuse to fund their destruction. You can love someone and still call it what it is. You can love someone and need them to face consequences, not because you've given up. Because you haven't. Chloe is proof of that. That little girl called the number on the refrigerator because somewhere underneath everything, she believed help would come. She was right. If this found you at the right time, drop a comment and let me know. And if you know someone holding the line in their family alone, share this with them. It helps to know you're not doing it alone.